The team believed the corpses would lie preserved in the ice, but nothing prepared them for what they uncovered.
It was such a profoundly moving experience, and also one of shock, really, or amazement that these sailors from the last century, there they were. You could see their eyelashes, you could see their eye color, you could even get a sense almost of the personality of these characters.
After the autopsy in the Arctic, the bodies of the Franklin sailors were reburied, and the team returned to their laboratory in Canada to continue the investigation. It was there, as they began to run forensic tests on the sailors' hair and soft tissue, that they discovered something intriguing. Levels of lead 6 to 10 times normal, enough to cause severe lead poisoning. But what had caused it? The question drew the scientists back to another of the clues at Beechey Island, the Tower of Tin food cans. When they tested the lead in the soldering of the cans, it matched the lead found in the bodies.
It's like a fingerprint that was found in the bodies, in the organs, in the tissues, in the bone, that was also found in the solder. It came from the tin food supply, and that was the smoking gun.
Not everyone was convinced. Some scientists argued the lead levels could have been caused by the industrial pollution of Victorian Britain. But then in the 1990s, a Canadian anthropologist decided to test the evidence from a new angle. Using a process called X-ray fluorescence, she discovered the indications of lead were much higher in soft, spongy bones like the vertebrae than any other bones in the body. It was a vital clue, because soft bones virtually regenerate themselves every few years.
These individuals were exposed to this lead over a fairly recent period of time before their death. So this was short-term exposure from some source on the expedition.
Above all, Keenly-Side's tests confirmed the extraordinary levels of lead in the bodies.
They were so high that these individuals would have almost certainly been suffering from serious physiological and neurological problems.
The symptoms would include fatigue, confusion, and paranoia. In itself, the lead might not kill the men, but if they were sick already, it could. The surgeons might never have guessed, though, that their ingenious tin food supply was the very thing poisoning the men.
Suddenly you have a picture that suggests that the technology that Franklin had hoped to see them through actually played a role in their destructions. There was something that was undermining the health of the crews.
With men sickening, the ships trapped, their commander dead, and supplies running low, the crew's situation was growing desperate. The expedition log gave one last clue as to what happened next. It said 105 men were deserting the ships and making for a place called Back's Fish River. But Back's Fish River was the other side of a channel they might need boats to cross. And after that, it was a further 90 miles to the river. By any standard, it was a momentous decision. They were abandoning the shelter and safety of the ships for the Arctic wilderness around them.
Given the shortage of provisions and the circumstances of the ships, it was probably an unavoidable choice. The ship is a kind of a womb, it's a kind of a place of safety, but eventually your refuge is going to be your tomb.
The expedition log was signed by the officer now in command, Francis Crozier, the man who feared Franklin would blunder into the ice. But if Crozier judged Franklin, he now faced an even bigger test himself. The ships were stranded 600 miles from the nearest civilization, and no one at the Admiralty had ever anticipated that the men would need to travel by foot across the harshest landscape on Earth. 1959, the search party that found the expedition log also came across an abandoned boat. Together with its heavy oak sled, the boat weighed 1,400 pounds. But it was what was inside that shocked the searchers most.
This boatload of strange relics of Victorian culture. The Vicar of Wakefield prayer books, New Testament in French, carpet slippers, chocolate, tea, button polishers, buttons, silver plate and utensils. All of the detritus of this, inner culture of the ships that they tried to take with them.
I can imagine these people desperately wanting to carry their precious world with them, but everything they trusted was now going to become not an advantage, but a problem. So that they were burdened now by their numbers, they were burdened now by the weight of their stores, and above all, burdened by the fact that they didn't know what to do with the land that they were now suddenly totally dependent on.
For more than a century, it was assumed that the Franklin survivors who deserted the ships in 1848 died of sickness and starvation on their journey south that year. But that ignored one fascinating possibility, that there were eyewitnesses in the Arctic to the fate of these men. Hidden in a Washington archive for more than 100 years were detailed accounts of Inuit people encountering Franklin's men. The testimony, studied by Russell Potter, was given to an explorer called Francis Hall in the 1860s. But it was discarded because the Victorians believed the Inuit were ignorant savages.
I think that the evidence he brought back was just evidence people did not want to hear. I mean, for more than a century, people ignored that evidence. The vague babble of savages, they called it. Inuit testimony couldn't be trustworthy. They couldn't have known. But he was incredibly diligent. He went and lived among them. He gathered information carefully. He asked people again and again the same questions, corroborated the testimony. It's really one of the most remarkable bodies of evidence we have, from eyewitnesses who actually saw what happened.
The first intriguing clue amongst the Inuit evidence told of an abandoned camp on King William Island.
The story recurred of a camp, a tent place, as Hall called it, where there was some sign of a permanent camp. There were bodies, there was equipment. The Inuit had been there and brought things out of it. And eventually he had eyewitnesses who had been there, who had seen the tent.
The presence of a camp, where men had spent some time, suggested that something had brought the expedition's journey south to a halt that summer. In the expedition log, Crozier said they were making for Backsfish River, a 250-mile journey south. But this camp, found by the Inuit, was barely 80 miles south of the ships. No one knows why they might have abandoned the journey south. But it's possible the sickness amongst the men was getting worse, and that 3 years into their Arctic journey, a new factor was at work: scurvy.
When you combine lead and scurvy, you suddenly have this tag team undermining the health of the crewmen. It really was a recipe for a mass disaster.
As the winter of 1848 approached, Crozier and his second-in-command, James Fitzjames, the young officer on his first voyage to the Arctic, must have realized their chances of walking off the island were gone. There was just one tentative clue to the decision they made. When the search party found the boat full of possessions abandoned, one of the searchers noticed a strange detail.
Having surveyed the site, he notices the boat, and it is actually pointed in what seemed to him the wrong direction. It's not going away from where the ships were abandoned, it's going back. These were not people who were going somewhere in expectation of release. They were retreating back to the only home that they knew and trying desperately to get there.